Hello, and thank you for tuning in. In particular, I want to thank all those who came out to our first Med Minute Update live presentation last Thursday night. We had a great crowd, and I hope everyone learned a lot. This will be the edited PowerPoint presentation from the meeting. Uh, and if you can, please like and subscribe to the channel. Leave some feedback for us in the comments. We're always looking for ways to improve. I can't do this alone. I need your help. So please let me know other topics you'd like to see, problems, concerns, anything. If I messed up, please call me out on it. Always looking to do better and help people reach their healthcare goals. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. Of course, this is not medical advice. This is just for informational purposes only. There is no doctor-patient relationship. Everything that we discuss could either be safe or dangerous considering the context, so please discuss any medications or dietary changes with your physician or healthcare provider before making them. So I want to start off with just a discussion about sugar. So we're talking about how insulin affects weight loss, insulin related to weight loss. Well, sugar or carbohydrates that turn to sugar once they're digested and absorbed are the key to weight in general, weight loss, weight gain, whatever, whichever the case may be. So this is not a new concept. There is a book published in 1972 by John Yudkin regarding the dangers of sugar. I believe it was the first publication by a scientist to anticipate the adverse health effects, especially in relation to obesity and heart disease. And it really highlighted the public's increased sugar consumption at the time. When this was published, Mr. Yudkin sat on the advisory panel of the British Department of Health's Committee on Medical Aspects of Food and Nutrition Policy. And at that time, Ansel Keys was a physiologist and scientist from the United States who came to prominence in the 30s and 40s for his views on the dangers of saturated fat in relation to polyunsaturated fats as a cause for heart disease. Well, Keys promoted a low-fat diet without restriction on sugar or carbohydrates, and so he and Yudkin had some notable disagreements during this time period. And I think at this point we can safely say that Keys was on to something as far as fat related to heart disease, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And sugar, in particular carbohydrate intake, is really more of a driver related to insulin than just polyunsaturated and saturated fat intake. There's a lot more to it than that. Insulin resistance is a big problem, and this is what happens to us if we intake or eat too many sugars and too many carbohydrates over a long enough period of time without sufficient break. So over years and years, especially in the United States, we tend to eat constantly. We eat all the time, and we never give our pancreas, which is where insulin is released, a break from all these meals. So because of this, our insulin level stays elevated, or there's pressure for our insulin level to be elevated because of our sugar and carbohydrate intake. And that eventually our body gets tired of all the insulin and becomes resistant to it. So when we eat sugar or carbohydrates, so say we eat an apple or spaghetti noodle or a biscuit, that gets broken down by our digestive tract and turns into sugar, goes into the bloodstream, and our body does not like sugar in the blood, at least not too much of it. And so it releases insulin to take that sugar out of the bloodstream. It thinks we've been fed and then triggers that to be stored as triglycerides. So when insulin is around, our body thinks we've been fed and it wants to store everything for later. So because of this, over time, if we have insulin around constantly, our body eventually gets tired of it and starts to ignore it, and that is insulin resistance. At first, this is no problem. We just pancreas makes a little more insulin, our sugar stays normal. But if this goes on long enough, eventually we can no longer make enough insulin to keep our blood sugar normal, and that is when doctors will say you're diabetic. But that has actually been coming for a long time. And a lot better test actually would be a fasting insulin level. Once the fasting insulin level starts to creep up, that's a much better indicator of metabolic disease than waiting until you can't keep your blood sugar normal. And that's when the A1C and blood sugar become noticeably elevated. So even a bad diabetic or a poorly controlled diabetic can have a normal blood sugar. So blood sugar in and of itself is not as critical as insulin. So if you're really concerned about your health and your risk for diabetes, a fasting insulin level will be a much better lab test to get than just a blood sugar. So talk to your doctor about that. The food pyramid is another problem at the foundation, which I think they do MyPlate instead of the food pyramid. But when I was younger, the food pyramid was the United States Health Guides for nutrition, and the foundation of that is grains, and that is really not good. Any reasonable diet, the foundation is going to be vegetables other than potatoes and certainly other than grains. Corn and wheat are not vegetables, they are grains, and they contain a lot of carbohydrates. So we have to be mindful of this as far as our risk for weight gain and diabetes are concerned. So keep that in mind, and I'll show some examples later of better food pyramid examples. So low-fat diet typically is higher in carbohydrates, which increases our risk for diabetes and weight gain, which is unhealthy. And then high fructose corn syrup is another problem, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that is a huge issue for increased weight gain. All right, so we were lied to for the last 50 plus years about a lot of things in our diet, and unfortunately that's led to a lot of misconceptions about foods that might be good for us and foods that might not be. So fat is one huge lie we were told, is that fat is bad for us and that it causes heart disease and high cholesterol, and that is not true in many ways. It's a lot more complicated than that. So fat in general may not be bad. It actually may be good. You can have healthy fats. Fats can be divided into two groups, healthy and unhealthy. And generally, healthy fats are fish oil, olive oil, coconut oil, and there's a lot of foods that contain healthy fats, such as avocado, eggs, things like that. Now, there's some cholesterol in eggs, but in general, eggs are healthy. And mayonnaise made from eggs is not necessarily bad. So there are some good fats out there. The problem with fats is how they're structured. That makes all the difference. So you probably have heard of omega-3 fatty acids. Well, those are very healthy. They're anti-inflammatory. They lower your triglycerides, things like that. They're very good for us. They improve our mood. They can be, antidepressants, things like that. So healthy fats are really good. And omega-3s, what that means is the fatty acid chain has a series of carbon atoms, and the omega would be the end of the carbon chain. And the third carbon back, typically in omega-3s, has a double bond, so that's how it gets its name, omega-3. So the third carbon from the end, the omega, has a double bond, and that makes all the difference. That double bond can be in different places. There's omega-6s, omega-7s. That determines how our body uses that, and whether it's inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, healthy, unhealthy, so on and so forth. So healthy fats can be very good for us, and we can consume a fair amount of those without causing any trouble. Another lie is that a calorie is a calorie. Calories are completely different. Our bodies take in calories, and then our hormones tell us what to do with those. So what our hormones are telling us to do with the calories that we eat is much more important than really what the calories are from. But there's still some importance there. A calorie from carrots, 100 calories from carrots and 100 calories from ice cream are completely different, and I think most people would realize that. So a calorie is not a calorie, and it's not as simple as just cutting calories. Our hormones control what we do with the calories that we take in. And if our hormones are telling us to store everything as fat, we're going to store it. It doesn't matter how many calories we eat, whether it's 100 or 2,000. Another lie is that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. that is a complete lie. We can go very well without breakfast. It's not going to hurt anything. We can do just fine. And actually that helps. Intermittent fasting is a good diet that takes advantage of that. You wait a little bit longer before you eat or drink any calories, and your body continues to burn some of those calories that you've got stored up as fat, and that can actually be very good and healthy. So that improves growth hormone levels and things like that. So going without breakfast is certainly an option, and you can look into that in more detail. Uh, just exercise more. There's no problem with exercise, but you cannot exercise away a bad diet. If you're not eating properly, it doesn't matter how much you exercise, it's not going to help. So exercise is good, but that alone is not it. It has to be paired with a good diet, the foundation of health. And then just eat low fat food. This is one of the worst. Low fat foods are loaded with sugar and carbohydrates. If you take out the fat, a lot of times the protein is too expensive, so they don't add protein. They add sugar, which is cheap. And then I've just mentioned the reason sugar is bad, and we'll go through that in some more detail in the future. So if you are not losing weight, then you are typically not just eating too many calories. That's another lie. So that one where you're told if you're not losing calories in equals calories out, if you're not losing weight, you're taking in more calories than you're burning. That is not true. It goes back to hormones. If you take in a few calories, but your hormones are telling you to store them, you're going to store them. You're not going to lose weight. So you have to take advantage of your hormones. And that is just extremely important. I can't stress that enough. It's really about what effect is the food that I eat going to have on my insulin and other hormones in my body. So this is a picture from a Newsweek article, Newsweek magazine that came out in the year 2000. So this is 23 years old from the time of this recording, and they're talking about it then. 6 million kids seriously overweight. Are they going to be fat for life? And now we we have great medications, we have great physicians, and yet our population continues to grow, not just in numbers, but in size as well, in body size. So we now have 14.7 million children who are seriously overweight. 14.7 million in 2020, the last year we have good numbers for. So this is unacceptable. We have got to start making some changes, and we have to make a change in the kids and not just the adults. So this is a photo from a Time magazine article, I think by Peter Menzel, several years ago, where I think he titled it Healthy Planet, and he traveled around the world into different countries and found the average meals that a group of people would eat in a week. So this is the typical meal for 1 week. And in the article, he went through what it would cost and all that. So here is a typical American family, I think from North Carolina or South Carolina. And this is what they would eat in a week. And you can see a lot of processed foods. They've got some fast food there. We've got McDonald's, Burger King, huge pizzas, potato chips, and milk, things like that. There's really not any vegetables on there. There's a few. There's a couple of tomatoes and then some grapes, which are fruit loaded with sugar. Just not a lot of vegetables, which would be the foundation of a healthy diet. Here is a picture of a family from Sudan and what they would typically eat in a week. So there's, 6 family members and not a lot of food there, and yet they survive just fine. A lot of calories compared to the Americans. Here is a family from Japan and what they would eat in a typical week. I think you can see a fair bit of vegetables there. The left third of the table there covered in vegetables, a lot of green leafy vegetables, completely different from the Americans. Here's a family from Mali, Mali. So a large family, not a lot of food. They eat a fair amount of grains, you can see. Not a lot of green leafy vegetables, but they seem to do fine. But I think that is their overall diet, not a lot of processed foods. So Grains in the right situation, the right context can be fine, but I think the American diet, we've got to be very careful with our grains. They're a little more genetically modified, more than likely, things like that. So very important. And then here's a family from Germany. You can see a fair amount of food for a family of four. I think the expenses are calculated. It's a fairly expensive amount of food as well. But here again, a lot of green leafy vegetables over on the right side, as you can see. Um, that is important. So there a fair amount of fruit, a lot of packaged things, but not overly processed items. And you can see the pizza down in the right lower corner. It's much smaller pizzas, but they do eat some pizza as well, a fair amount of beer. Um, but probably a lot healthier combinations than the American diet. And here is just another picture of the American diet weekly food intake example. So you can compare that to the last slide. So where do we look for the truth in our diet, and how do we find what's right? Because we get so many contradicting opinions on how to eat. Well, in the gist of it is it has to be individualized. No one diet works for everyone. There are some overall really good diets. I think the Mediterranean diet is probably the best diet overall. And there's other good diets. Weight Watchers, the keto diet is not terrible. It may not be right for some people, and there can be some problems with it long term. But in general, find a diet that works for you. Try to eat a variety of foods, whole foods, and and do your best. So the common sense, use your common sense. So think about this. A lot of people will talk about how much fat is in red meat, and red meat does have a lot of fat. Cardiologists in particular will talk about how bad red meat can be for heart disease and things. But think about that for a minute. There's more to it than just eating the food. It has to do with how our body processes it and what do we use it for. What do we do with the calories we take in? So think about a cow. It's true, red meat does have a lot of fat in it, but how did the cow get so fat? The cow did not eat any red meat. The cow did not eat any fat. The cow is out in a field all day eating grass or is fed corn, fed grain from humans. So cows and horses and goats, herbivores in general, they possess an enzyme. They can break down plant material and get sugar out of it. Humans cannot. That would be fiber for us, so cellulose, the cell wall of plants. We cannot break that down, but that is sugar. It's just linked together a little bit differently than other sugars and carbohydrates. So cows sit around all day eating carbohydrates and they get big and fat. And big surprise, humans, if we sit around all day long eating carbohydrates, we get big and fat. Breakfast, certainly not that important. Intermittent fasting is an excellent example of that. Most people, when they start intermittent fasting, they will skip breakfast. So normally we eat for about a 16-hour period through the day, or consume calories through 16 hours, and then we sleep or fast for 8 hours and do not take any calories in. Well, when you start intermittent fasting, you progressively increase the fasting time. So you go from an 8-hour fast to maybe 10 hours. So then you fast for 10, you wait a little bit later to eat breakfast in the morning, and so that will put you at a 14-hour period of eating and a 10-hour fast, and you increase that until eventually you get to reverse of what the normal pattern would be. So you do not consume any calories for 16 hours, and then you eat for an 8-hour window, and that actually can work very well. Another common sense point is that low fat foods are typically loaded with sugar to improve their taste, as I mentioned earlier. And what is another point? What is the real problem with diet drinks? So diet drinks in and of themselves are not bad. I will not go into whether aspartame is bad for you. I think we can agree that it's not great for people, but it's not the end of the world. Aspartame may cause some problems, but I can assure you, I see it every day, that high blood sugar and diabetes cause heart attacks, stroke, blindness, neuropathy, kidney disease, all these bad problems. Um, and so that is a definite. So aspartame may cause some difficulties, but diabetes definitely causes a great deal of problems. Huge healthcare burden. The aspartame burden on society is nothing compared to diabetes and insulin resistance. So kind of keep that in mind. However, that being said, the problem with diet drinks typically is that the artificial sweetener still tastes sweet to your brain. And so when we drink something that has artificial sweetener in it, our brain thinks we had regular sugar. Well, there's a cephalic or brain response to the pancreas that will trigger the pancreas to release insulin just like we consumed a meal. Similar to Pavlov's dog, that was a Russian scientist who did experiments on dogs. He would put probes in the mouth and stomach to detect salivation and stomach acid secretion. So when he would feed the dog, he would measure that, and then he would ring a bell every time he fed them. And after a while, he would just ring the bell and not provide them food. And the dogs would salivate and secrete stomach acid exactly like they had been fed. And so that is called classical conditioning. And our bodies get conditioned to that. So when we drink something, our bodies can release insulin and cause our blood sugar to drop because we didn't get anything with actual sugar in it. So the sugar that's in our bloodstream drops, and then that can trigger hunger. So we can get very hungry after we drink diet drinks because of a reaction of lowered blood sugar because of that. If that, I hope that makes sense. But basically, we drink artificial sweetener. Our brain thinks we got regular sweetener. It expects that our sugar is going to go up, anticipates that, causes the pancreas to release some insulin. We do not actually get sugar absorbed, and so the blood sugar that we have declines, and we get near low blood sugar levels, or our blood sugar starts to drop and triggers a hunger response to compensate for that, and then we want to eat more. So diet drinks can stimulate hunger and make you want to eat more, but they do not put the food in your mouth. So it's a very complicated process, but keep that in mind. And obviously, as I said before, 100 calories from carrots is not the same as 100 calories from ice cream. I think that is common sense. So here is another example of good fats and bad fats and how fat is not necessarily bad in and of itself. So this first book on the left was published in 1958, Eat Fat and Grow Slim. So this is not a new concept that eating fat actually can help you lose weight. It's the carbohydrates and sugar that stimulate insulin that causes us to gain weight. So if we eat a reasonable diet of fat, healthy fats, and reasonable proteins, not processed foods, that can help quite a bit. And then Dr. Mark Hyman published a book in 2016, Eat Fat, Get Thin, reiterating the same principles. So I'd encourage you to check these out if you're interested in that. But good fats are very beneficial and actually can promote weight loss rather than weight gain. So here are just a few examples of good books. I hope you like to read like I do. This is an excellent one. This is by Dr. Ken Berry. He is actually just down the road from me in Camden or Holiday, Tennessee. And this is a good book about lies that you were told by your doctor and things to do about it. So I would encourage you to check that out. That's a good one. The Longevity Diet here by Dr. Longo, Walter Longo, is a good one. Why We Get Fat, Paleo Code, Brain Maker, just some good examples of books. The Keto Diet by Dr. Josh Axe, Good Calories, Bad Calories, Feeding You Lies, another example. And then The Big Fat Surprise, Always Hungry, Keto Resources, Bulletproof Diet, Impact Diet, a lot of good examples about how fats can help promote health and that it's not as simple as calorie restriction and that all fat is bad. So keep that in mind. So when I say sugar, I refer to anything that raises your blood sugar levels or blood glucose levels. So when I say sugar, I include biscuits, gravy, uh, oranges, apples, bananas, pasta, yogurt, things like that. So I really mean all carbohydrates. So kind of keep that in mind as we go forward here. Here's some information just for some comparison, just for your some details that you might want to keep in the back in the back of your mind. So these are comparative sweetnesses of different sugars. So there's lactose, which is a molecule of glucose and a molecule of galactose together. That's milk sugar. Not all that sweet, but will still raise your blood sugar. So this is how sweet things taste to us, not necessarily how much they'll raise our blood sugar. So as you can see, it moves on. Glucose there in the middle at 74, and then sucrose, which is a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose together. So that's a disaccharide. That's table sugar. Then at the bottom, you got fructose just by itself, much, much sweeter. So I think you can see that as you put two sugars together, it's typically not as sweet tasting as a one sugar, a single molecule of sugar. So disaccharides generally are not quite as sweet tasting as monosaccharides. And then complex carbohydrates do not taste as sweet. So bread, pasta, things like that, those are complex carbs. Potatoes, they're not going to taste as sweet as table sugar, and certainly not as sweet as fructose with 173 compared to 100 of sucrose on relative sweetness. Don't panic. This is just a comparison. I just want you to see there's glucose on the top left, fructose on the top right, and then sucrose down at the bottom. And these are four other sugars laid out in a different way. So they kind of form a ring with themselves, but they can be straightened out and notated this way. So they're all 6-carbon sugars. And so there's glucose on the left, a D-glucose and an L-glucose, the next one, D-mannose, and then D-galactose. So a lot of different variations on these 6-carbon sugars. There's a lot of different ones. So this is cellulose. It's hard to tell the differences between this and the other sugars and how they're put together, but this is two 6-carbon sugars linked together at a certain position here in the center. And that is very important as to how that can be broken apart. And like I said before, humans do not have an enzyme to break that apart. So that is not absorbed. That is simply fiber for us. But cows, horses, goats, things like that, they can break that bond and they get sugar out of plant material. So fructose specifically is quite dangerous. It has a shortcut metabolism through the liver, so to speak, a little more complicated than that, but basically it can be stored as fat without the use of insulin. It doesn't have as much of an insulin response and can lead to fatty liver in lots of cases. And if you know somebody that has fatty liver, it can be quite a problem over the long term. It can actually cause liver failure and things like that, but it's typically from too much sugar intake. Our body really doesn't discriminate on where it puts fat. It can store it anywhere, and some people tend to store it in the liver as opposed to other areas of the body, but fat gets stored everywhere if you take in enough calories, and your insulin, your hormones are telling your body to store fat, and that can be quite a problem. So fructose, when they came out with, they discovered glucose isomerase to easily convert fructose, and I can't remember exactly what year that was. I think it was in the 50s maybe, or 60s, 1950s, 1960s, where they created this, and they realized they could generate high fructose corn syrup, things like that, very inexpensively. So at that time in the 50s and 60s, if you went to the movie theater and got a Coke, the most expensive thing in the cup was the syrup. And now if you go to the theater and get a drink, the most expensive thing in the cup is the cup. Actually, the syrup is very inexpensive. And I'm not trying to pick on Coke here in particular. That's just my generic term for soda. We just call it Coke around here. Whether it's Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Mountain Dew, anything like that, it's all a soda, not a pop things like that. That's more of a northern term, but here in Tennessee, most people around here just refer to drinks, sodas, as Coke. Um, so fructose, of course, much sweeter, so more addictive. So you can get out of hand with fructose a little more quickly than you can the others. So obesity is a huge problem. The cost of healthcare related expenses from obesity and other diseases after it progresses to diabetes and other problems, heart disease, strokes, all that is a huge cost on the American taxpayer and really all over the world. And the prevalence increased significantly from 2017 to 2020, went from 30.5% of obesity up to 41.9% of the population in 2020. And then prevalence for severe obesity increased. It over doubled or almost doubled from 4.7% to 9.2% during that same time frame. And here are just some of the problems that occur from insulin resistance and then progression to diabetes. So hormone imbalances, elevated triglycerides, cravings for sugar, fatigue, abdominal obesity, constantly feeling hungry, and inability to lose weight. So this just goes back to the diet and exercise. So this is an example of a food pyramid that would be more appropriate. There's another example on the next slide. I think that's a little larger, better able to see it, a little easier to see. So people sit more, and we really need to get more exercise. And then the bottom, the foundation of our food intake should really be vegetables and not grains, things like that. So we'll go to the next slide here and look at it in more detail. So here is a much better representation. So at the bottom you've got a lot of fruits and vegetables, a lot more vegetables than fruits, honestly. Fruits are up in the second tier with grains because they do contain a lot of sugar. There's nothing necessarily bad about fruit, but it's sugar. It's simply the way the plant stores its extra sugar. And if you're diabetic, a banana can be just as bad as a candy bar. So you have to be careful. But green leafy vegetables, non-starchy vegetables at the bottom, fruits and grains, and then you've got oils and nuts, so olive oil, walnuts, almonds, pecans, things like that, coconut oil, going to be good, and then fish and seafood, and then some eggs and poultry, and then red meat and sweets at the top. I might personally make a few small changes to this, but this is not a bad way to go, and I think this represents the Mediterranean diet fairly well. So if your insulin level is not up, then some of these foods are not as bad in context. But if you are already starting from behind and you're overweight, you're having trouble losing weight despite calorie restriction, you're not able to exercise much, then getting the carbohydrates to a minimum can be a decent way to start. Don't have to necessarily do keto or Atkins, but just keep in mind the carbohydrates, and we'll talk more about why that's important here in just a minute. And keep in mind, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to do this 100% of the time. If you make a change and it's 75 to 80% of the time, that's going to have a huge impact for you. And just to kind of circle back to fasting, so the benefits of intermittent fasting or even long-term fasting over several days is great. It does not hurt us, and fasting has been around for thousands of years. In the Bible, they mentioned fasting over 2,000 years ago, so this is not a new concept. Fasting increases rather than decreases our metabolism. Think about it. Your body is smart. So if you are going to have to go out and find food because you haven't had anything to eat for several days, your body is not going to be weakened. It's going to have energy to go get that food. Now, if your starvation goes on long enough, yes, you will get weak. But we put up with mild starvation or having to do without for a few days very well. Now that's provided you're not on a medication to lower your blood sugar or your blood pressure, things like that. If you're on prescription medications because of your health, then fasting may not be the best option, and you need to discuss that with your healthcare provider. So please don't just rush into anything Always you got to put it in context it's an individual decision that the answer in one person's case may be one thing and may be the complete opposite in someone else, depending on the situation. So stress is another huge problem. That causes us to release cortisol, probably really increase insulin levels. It's going to make us more likely to store calories, and also we seek out comfort. So people are going to want to eat more of the comfort foods, so the sugary foods, ice cream, pasta, things like that, and that can lead to weight gain. So if you're trying to lose weight, think about ways you can combat your stress, lower your stress level, or just address and deal with stress a little more efficiently. Things like ashwagandha, holy basil. There's lots of supplements that can help, but get plenty of rest, things like that. That is a good start. Keep your hormones in mind when you are trying to be healthy, and certainly when you're trying to lose weight. So if you're trying to lose weight, the next step, you could begin what I call a carbohydrate aware diet. So just be aware of where you're getting carbohydrates and kind of lower those, try to increase your healthy fats. Just look at the labels on your food. Try to strictly limit the really high carbohydrate foods. So, when you get the rolls at a meal, try not to eat the rolls. Get a green leafy vegetable, some broccoli, cauliflower, something like that instead of potato. Be careful with cereals. They have a lot of carbs in them. And then particularly concentrated sweets, so ice cream and candy. Kind of keep that to a treat or a minimum. Exercise, drink plenty of water, get plenty of sleep. Make an appointment with your doctor and discuss it. Just ask them for some advice. See what they would tell you to do. You can check out our Facebook group. We're on Facebook, and we also have our website. So Medical Specialty Clinic Facebook, and then medspecialtyclinic.com is our website. medspecialtyclinic.com for our website. We've got a blog, and then I also have a YouTube channel with these videos, which is where this video will be posted. So check out those, the blog posts on the website for some more information. Just here at the end, just a pro tip, something I've noticed over the years, is try not to have a drink with your meals. So if you're trying to lose weight and you're struggling, looking for something to get you over the hump, don't have a drink with your meals. When people have gastric bypass, the providers will typically tell them not to drink, that they can't have a drink when they eat a meal. And it's because it will make them eat more. And if you've ever seen a hot dog eating contest, as the contestants are trying to eat the hot dogs, they put the buns, they will dip them in a cup of water before they eat them, because it actually compresses them and they can eat more through that. So taking away the drink when you eat a meal can help you feel full faster, things like that. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I don't have this obviously on the video, but here in the lecture there were handouts for carbohydrate aware diet, and then a book list. You can get those at the office if you want. Just contact us, call us, or come in, and I can get you a book list and some details on my carbohydrate aware diet. I'll try to post a link to the download in this video. So before I get done, I just wanted to give a couple of examples of looking at labels. And so here is just a good old container of Wonder Bread, which I'm sure most of you have seen before. And here is the nutrition information. So you always want to look first at the serving size and see how many servings it is. So you can see here we've got 2 slices of bread is 1 serving, and so that will tell you here the total carbohydrates. That's really all I want you to look at, is the total carbohydrates. So that is 29 grams for 2 slices of bread. And they'll put a few things underneath that: fiber, sugars, added sugars. You don't really have to look at that. That sometimes can confuse people. So just start with total carbohydrates. Try not to worry too much about the protein and the fat, but just look at the total carbs, and then we're going to compare that to some other food items here. So the next is just a plain bagel. You can see no fruit or anything like that. It's just a plain Thomas bagel. And so for one serving is a whole bagel, as you would expect. And then total carbohydrates down here is 53. So the two slices of Wonder Bread was 29 grams. This is 53 grams. And I know I told you not to look at it, but you can see that the fiber is actually lower. So 2 grams instead of 3 grams of fiber in the bagel. And the problem with this, or the thing that strikes me, is that if I lined up 10 people and asked them which was healthier, two slices of Wonder Bread or a bagel, I think a lot of them would say bagel. And if you're diabetic or if you're trying to lose weight, then a bagel is clearly not better for you. The two slices of Wonder Bread would be better. Now, I would encourage you to kind of stay away from bread, or one slice of bread instead of two anyway, but definitely bread instead of bagel in this case. But you got to look at the labels. Every brand can be different. So you may go another brand of bread and it have half as many carbs or twice as many. So you really got to look at each individual package. And then I always like to show this example too. This is just a Little Debbie honey bun. So I think everybody would agree that this is very sweet. A lot of concentrated sweets and simple sugars. So let's look at the nutrition information on this. And so here you can see, surprisingly to me anyway, 33 grams of carbs. So the honey bun only has 4 grams more carbs than two slices of Wonder Bread, and 20 less than the Thomas bagel. So that is amazing to me that the honey bun would have that amount of carbs compared to the bagel, which had quite a bit more. So, that's important. So again, I'm not saying eat bagels, so don't take that away from this talk, but just look at the labels. You have to look. So the difference here, which is important, is that these are simple sugars. So comparing the honey bun to the loaf bread, the Wonder Bread, the honey bun is going to raise your blood sugar a lot quicker and a lot higher, but it will drop sooner. Whereas the two slices of bread will raise your blood sugar not quite as high, but it will keep it up for a long period of time. And so the net impact can be similar, but it's definitely going to be longer for the bread because they're more complex carbohydrates, and that's why they don't taste as sweet. So kind of keep that in mind when you eat. So, and two, when you eat simple sugars that spike your blood sugar and then they drop rapidly, that can induce hunger. So if your blood sugar is coming down very quickly, then you will get hungry, and that can be important to watch out for. And so here, just real quick, some comparisons of carbohydrate amounts from just in general. So a 7 to 8 inch banana is going to have 27 grams of carbs, which is quite a bit. And then a 12-ounce Coca-Cola, again, not picking on Coke, but this was from a Coca-Cola 12-ounce can label, 39 grams of carbs, and that's all simple sugars, going to absorb right through the stomach, raise your blood sugar really quick, and may make you hungry shortly after when that sugar starts to drop, because your body is going to release a lot of insulin rapidly to keep that down, and it might not be able to shut that down quick enough to keep you from having a little pseudo or near low blood sugar levels. It's going to stimulate some hunger. Snickers bar, 28 grams versus your banana, 27, pretty similar. So kind of keep that in mind as well as far as sugar content or carbohydrate content. Potato, 5-ounce potato, which a lot of those are going to be more than 5 ounces. So that's going to be 26 grams. And then Dannon yogurt, 13, 8-ounce glass of milk, 12, and Lay's sour cream and onion, 1 ounce. It's going to be 15 grams. Okay, I need to talk about the GLP-1 agonists for just a minute. They are so very important currently because they are being used so heavily for weight loss. And really they are extremely important diabetic medications because they work so well. They're easy to take. Most people tolerate them very, very well. So the side effects are very good. A very good side effect profile for these medications. So just wanted to touch on those. So GLP-1 agonists interact with the glucagon-like peptide one receptor, and this receptor is located all over the body, in the brain, in the pancreas, the thyroid gland, just muscles all over the body. So it's a very active area. And so these medications actually have been around for several years. They started out with medications like Byetta and Victoza, and they're taken either once or twice a day by a subcutaneous injection, so a very small needle just under the skin is how they're given. And then they've developed these newer types that work the same way but a little more efficiently, and they last longer, so they can be given once a week. So they're very nice, small injection that you can give once a week, and you don't have to really worry about it. And they don't really cause a lot of low blood sugar levels. They work with the receptor, and glucose has to be present. So typically they don't cause too much hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, although any medicine that affects blood sugar metabolism, you do have to watch for that. But these are not usually too bad about that. So for weight loss specifically, Ozempic or semaglutide is approved for that, and it under the name Wegovy for weight loss is its approval. And then some previous medicines, I think Saxenda or Saxenda is FDA approved for weight loss, and that's the same as Victoza, I believe. So you can feel free to do your own research on this, but these medications slow down the stomach emptying out, so they can cause some nausea, things like that. They do increase insulin secretion, but typically only if glucose is present. And then they also decrease gluconeogenesis or glucose production from the liver. So you can see the different doses. These are comparative doses. Mounjaro or tirzepatide is very powerful for weight loss as well. It's just not FDA approved yet for it. I believe it will be FDA approved eventually for weight loss as well as diabetes. But for right now, Mounjaro is on label only for diabetes. 2.5 milligrams is the starting dose of that. Semaglutide or Ozempic is going to be 0.25 milligrams. Going to go up to 0.5, 1, and 2 milligrams. Trulicity or dulaglutide, Bydureon or exenatide. These are some other options. So these are good choices for diabetes, and a lot of times doctors will start these medications first for type 2 diabetes. Not type 1, but for type 2. So very good. Just very commonly used. They do have some side effects you have to watch out for. So you can't take them if you've ever had a history of medullary thyroid cancer. We don't think they cause thyroid cancer, but if a thyroid cancer is present, those receptors are there and they can stimulate that cancer to grow faster, and you don't want that. So same way with just like testosterone. Testosterone doesn't cause prostate or testicular cancer, but if there is a cancer there, it can respond to that hormone, and it can make it grow more aggressively and faster. So that would not be a good thing. And then pancreatitis. There's some cases of pancreatitis from these medications, so you have to watch for that. Other than that, they're very safe. There are some other side effects that I'll let you look up on your own. And as always, discuss this with your provider, your healthcare provider, before you start any new medication. So this is just a touch on the compounded forms. Semaglutide typically is the most common compounded form. Weight loss clinics a lot of times will carry this. It's less expensive than the brand. It's dosed in units, so many milligrams per unit. And then typically they come in a 2 milliliter vial, which would be 200 units or 100 units per ml. 1 milliliter is 100 units. Thanks a lot for tuning into this video. I hope you got something out of it. I hope it wasn't too boring. Thanks to all the people who showed up for the live portion of this lecture. Looking forward to it. We're going to try and do another one in a couple of weeks at the office. So if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. Area code 731-257-1500 is the office. You can also get in touch with us through our website, medspecialtyclinic.com. And then we're also on Facebook and Twitter and here on YouTube, where I'm going to post this video. So thanks again for tuning in. Really appreciate it. We wouldn't be able to do this without the patients. And if you want to call and schedule an appointment, talk to one of our healthcare providers, please feel free to do so. We don't just do weight loss. Obviously, we do general primary care. So diabetes, high blood pressure, COPD, heart failure, high cholesterol, rheumatoid arthritis. We treat just about everything here in Parsons. So look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks again.